This week for our employment law slot, Toil and Trouble, we're talking to CTU Secretary Melissa Ansell-Bridges. Melissa, thanks for joining us. Let's talk about what's happened today, which is the settlement in Kawerau. Now, why is this significant?
Well, it's been a long time coming for those workers in Kawerau. They've been locked out about 6 weeks now, 145 workers. And what they've got through that settlement, it was a facilitated settlement, is a great increase on what was originally offered. So really what they were asking for was a settlement which keeps up with cost of living increases, with inflation increases, and that is what has come out of this. So it's a great result for them. One of the other really heartening things that we've seen throughout that dispute as well is the huge public support for those workers. We actually ran a fundraiser for those locked out workers and in 24 hours had raised $20,000 and in the space of about a week it was I think at the end it was about $56,000 from other working people who wanted to support those workers who recognise that lockouts are really not a good way of dealing with workers. They see the sort of the unfairness and the unjust sort of attitude which drives those kinds of lockouts, and we're really just backing those workers, and so it's great to see that result that's come out of Kawerau.
But the company itself didn't actually back down, did it? It based its decision on something that came from the Employment Relations Authority. Can you explain why the company had gone that legal route to fight this?
That's right. So it was ultimately a facilitated agreement, and so the company and the union had been in that facilitated discussion for a couple of weeks, and ultimately the facilitator made a recommendation to the company and to the union, and both sides accepted that accepting that recommendation was the best path forward in order to stop the dispute, in order to stop the lockout and move forward. So it's a really good result.
Lockouts aren't that common these days, are they?
No, not particularly common, and this was a particularly long lockout as well. The most recent lockout, aside from this one, was in the Wellington buses last year, I believe it was, and that ended up being, I think, less than 24 hours, and ultimately was found to have been illegal as well. So they're not particularly common, and they are seen as a very heavy-handed tactic and not in keeping with what we expect in employment, in modern employment relations, which is a much more collaborative and productive engagement between unions and employers.
This week has also seen, of course, the death of Ken Douglas, who is a very important figure for the CTU and many others. What do you think his biggest legacy in terms of workplace relations is?
Oh, good question. And yes, a very sad passing, and certainly the union movement is mourning Ken's loss, and our sympathies and condolences go to his family. Ken was instrumental in the establishment of the Council of Trade Unions back in the late 80s, and that was a really significant step in employment relations and in the union movement in New Zealand, and it has continued that way since. There is a much greater sense of unity between unions as well, and that is helped to be facilitated through the Council of Trade Unions. So I think that his role in that work was huge. He obviously played an important role internationally in the union movement as well as in New Zealand, but definitely his role in the foundation of the Council of Trade Unions was really significant.
And he also had quite a sort of a pioneering or pragmatic view about how unions, employers and government could work together, didn't he? So he was a bit less perhaps confrontational in a way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he was a very pragmatic person who I think that approach has continued to evolve as well, and continues to be seen in a lot of union leaders in New Zealand nowadays also. And so he did have a way of bringing people together, and I think that that legacy lives on.
That's right. Now, quiet quitting is something that we're reading a lot about. What do you take that to mean, that phrase?
Yes, it's an interesting one. It's one of those phrases which has become commonly used, and actually I think it's terrible. I think it doesn't adequately really capture what that dynamic is, because it makes it sound very, very individualistic, and it makes it sound as though these people are giving up. And actually what it's describing is workers who have been doing more than 100%. They've been doing, 110, 120%. They're working really long hours. They're doing jobs which are actually outside the scope of their job description and what they are contracted to do, and who are getting to a point of exhaustion, of burnout, of frustration, and choosing to try and reprioritise and rebalance their lives and say that actually they don't want work to take up every waking moment of the day, and so they're putting some boundaries in place, and they're saying, I will absolutely do my job, I will do a full 100% of my job. What I'm not going to do is all of that other work which somehow has grown to be expected of me and I'm not being compensated for, and so really they're refusing to be exploited. And in no other area or sort of a type of contract would we expect somebody to do more than what is provided for in that contract for no extra reward. So really it's a rebalancing, and I think it comes off the back of the kind of exhaustion that we're seeing as a result of the pandemic. We know burnout rates are really high right now. People are really tired, and actually they're saying, there is more to life than just work, and I need to have some boundaries in place.
I would imagine you might argue that if union presence across workplaces was stronger, that people wouldn't have been put in this position in the first place. I mean, potentially they might have been protected more during COVID. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And when people are able to access union representation, then there is a greater ability to create those boundaries and clarify those expectations around work, and negotiate fairer contracts as well, which do provide for things like overtime, if that is a regular part of the job, that it ensures that people are actually compensated for that work. So certainly union membership is a way of kind of combating some of those drivers of quiet quitting. And we have seen this sort of this discussion, I suppose, recently around a resurgence of unions, and I think it ties into, it's a result of the same things that are driving that move towards quiet quitting.
Do you think this resurgence of union interest, perhaps in the UK and the US and other places, is that going to lead to big changes in the workplace, do you think? I mean, has it got the potential to disrupt in the way, and when I say disrupt, I mean it in a good and a bad way, disrupt like it did in the old days, or can it, is it a weakened version of what we've seen before?
Yeah, that's a good question. Unions are as strong as their members are active. So if people are feeling passionate about trying to improve conditions at work and are really wanting to invest in that collective action to try and make those changes, then yes, absolutely. There are some barriers or things which restrict unions' ability to fully organise with those workers in the form of employment relations law. And obviously the biggest impact that we've had on union membership in New Zealand was the Employment Contracts Act in 91, where we saw union membership go from slightly over 50% to down to 20%. And that's stabilised over the decades since then. But, we are on the verge of seeing some other changes in employment relations law, fair pay agreements, for example. Now, they will apply to everyone, regardless of whether they're a union member or not. So it's not automatic that fair pay agreements are going to lead to a growth in union membership. But people will have access to the kinds of collective bargaining and protection that unions, that unions do through that fair pay agreement mechanism. Also, pay equity is another good example where workers who might not be covered by unions are being covered by some of these claims which are being taken, and so they are sort of being brought into contact with unions, and where they're already feeling like something really needs to change for them at work, then there is an opportunity there for them to be involved in those union claims as well.
That's great, Melissa. Thank you very much for talking to MBR.
Thank you.